You're not allowed in here. I froze. A man in a wrinkled uniform wearing a badge that looked more like a prop than the real thing blocked the entrance to my property. He puffed out his chest, his voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from imagination rather than law enforcement training. Sir, you're trespassing. You need to leave immediately or we'll be forced to arrest you. I blinked. Really? My heart raced, but a small smirk formed on my lips. There was something off about him, a detail I couldn't ignore. My eyes drifted to his name tag. Something that should have been ordinary screamed wrong. My pulse quickened, not from fear, but excitement. The HOA wasn't just overreaching. They were committing a federal offense, right here, right now. And with a single phone call, I could bring this entire sham crashing down because the person backing me was someone very special. Music. The morning sun stretched long shadows across Pine Ridge Lake as I pulled my U-Haul to a stop. Everything I owned was packed inside, and after 15 years bouncing between corporate offices and government contracts as a cybersecurity consultant, I had finally claimed a sanctuary of my own. In my mind, the drafting table was already in place, perfectly positioned by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the serene lake. Technically, my contract allowed me to move in on the 15th of June, but I wanted a head start to get settled before the official date. What could go wrong with arriving a single day early? I took a deep breath of the crisp, pine-scented air. Finally, I felt the weight of years begin to lift. This was my moment. This was supposed to be perfect. Then they appeared. 2 officers, as if conjured from thin air, stepped onto my property. The first was a burly man with a belt straining under his gut, his sergeant's stripes glaringly obvious, as if they had been ironed on yesterday. The second was shorter, leaner, but no less threatening, his hand resting on what appeared to be pepper spray. "Sir, you need to leave immediately," the bigger man barked, stepping squarely into my path. "You violate Pinirayaj HOA regulations, and we have the authority to arrest you for trespassing." I glanced down at the deed in my hand. Perfectly legal. Mine. Then back at the 2 men. Something about them screamed wrong. Their stance, their tone, even the way their uniforms hung. On them, it was all slightly off. My years in cybersecurity had trained me to notice small inconsistencies that others overlooked, and right now alarms blared in my mind. I studied the bigger man's name tag, Officer Martinez. But the lettering, it was upside down. Not skewed, not crooked, completely inverted. No real law enforcement officer would make such a glaring mistake. Not only was this a rookie error, it was an amateurish fraud. And then the truth hit me. These weren't cops. They were imposters. A surge of adrenaline mixed with anger. The HOA hadn't just sent enforcers. They had sent criminals impersonating. Federal officers which carried serious federal penalties. I needed evidence, and I needed it perfect. Calmly, I pulled out my phone, activated the dashcam app, and began recording. Timestamp and GPS coordinates lit up the screen. "I'm sorry." "Officers," I said, deliberately playing dumb. I didn't realize I was doing anything wrong. My contract says I can move in today, but if there's a mistake, I'll cooperate. The big man puffed up, clearly relishing his imagined authority. "That's right. You'll cooperate. Now, load your things back in that truck and get off this property before we press charges." Perfect. Every word, every gesture, every poorly made badge was now on record. I let him think he was winning, all while observing the finer details. The shorter man's badge looked like it came from a costume shop, and the holster on the big guy's side was rigged incorrectly for a right-handed draw. Amateur. All of them. Then, the clincher. As Officer Martinez shifted slightly, I could see through the plastic backing of the upside-down tag. His real name, Frank Morrison. A quick mental scan recalled the story. Frank Morrison, a security guard fired from a local mall 6 months ago for threatening customers, with whispers of potential cyberstalking in his past. The pieces aligned beautifully. I wasn't just dealing with HOA overreach. This was an organized intimidation operation, possibly targeting something I owned. Slowly, I backed toward my truck, maintaining my scared act while my mind raced through every strategic response. My phone came out again, fingers flying. I composed a message to an old friend. Governor Mark Ellison. Mark, I need help. Someone's impersonating federal officers at Pine Ridge. Video attached. Happening now. I hovered over send, but then a sound froze my blood. Movement inside. The cabin. My heart skipped. The fake officers weren't just for show, they were a distraction. Someone else was inside, rifling through my property. Through the kitchen window, I saw a man in work clothes, meticulously sifting through my boxes, not taking anything but searching. Close enough to tap the glass, I called out, and he jumped, fumbling a flimsy explanation about emergency electrical inspections. His story made no sense. I filmed him anyway, capturing face, truck, and license plate. When he slunk away, and the imposters realized intimidation alone wouldn't work, I finally processed the situation. This wasn't random, it was calculated. They had a target, and it was me. I uploaded the footage to my secure cloud storage with unalterable timestamps and dialed Governor Ellison directly. Mark answered on the second ring, voice immediate and serious. I explained the situation, sent the video. Jesus Christ, Julian, he said. Impersonating federal officers is a Class E felony. They're looking at 5 to 10 years minimum. I could hear him giving orders in the background. 2 state troopers are en route as a protective detail. This is a potential threat to a state consultant. Stay put. The weight of official backing was both comforting and surreal. Ellison also connected me with investigative journalist Megan Parker, an ally skilled in uncovering corruption the law alone couldn't touch. Within the hour, I had protection and a media partner. The HOA had no idea the storm they had unleashed. Then, as if summoned by fate, Veronica Sharp arrived. A black Mercedes slid up the driveway, flanked by 2 sedans filled with sharply dressed lawyers. Veronica herself radiated authority and menace, the perfect face of a mayoral candidate wielding power against homeowners. 3 attorneys flanked her like bodyguards, each one carrying thick folders and looking ready for war. Mr. Reed, she said, in a voice that could freeze hellfire. I'm Veronica Sharp, president of the Pine Ridge HOA and a practicing attorney. You violated your purchase agreement by arriving early, and you've just committed defamation by recording private security contractors without consent, she gestured to her legal team. We're prepared to file suit for breach of contract and seek damages of $500,000, unless you vacate this property immediately. The legal intimidation was impressive. I had to admit, most normal people would have crumbled under the pressure of facing down 4 lawyers on their own doorstep. But most people hadn't spent years dealing with corporate espionage cases and international cybercrime law. Miss Sharp, I replied calmly, I have every legal right to be on my own property as of yesterday, according to my signed contract, and I have every right to record people who are trespassing and impersonating law enforcement officers. I held up my phone, still recording. In fact, I'm documenting this entire conversation as evidence of what appears to be organized harassment and intimidation. Her perfectly composed mask slipped for just a second, and I saw something dangerous flash in her eyes. This woman wasn't just aggressive, she was genuinely ruthless. As the tension reached its peak, I noticed an elderly man from the neighboring property slowly walking his dog along the shoreline. But something about his movement seemed intentional rather than casual. He made eye contact with me for just a moment and gave an almost imperceptible nod toward the boat dock. Then he mouthed silently. I saw everything. My heart rate jumped. This could be the witness I needed. Someone who'd observed the fake cops, the break-in, maybe even more. As Veronica and her legal team finished their threats and climbed back into their Mercedes convoy, the old man approached my fence line. Name's Robert, he whispered, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Been watching that woman. Destroy families in this neighborhood for 2 years. Meet me at the boat dock tonight after dark. I've got something you need to see." After everyone left, I sat on my deck trying to process the morning's events while waiting for the state troopers to arrive. The lake was peaceful, exactly what I'd imagined when I bought this place. But now it felt like the calm before a storm. When I checked my mailbox for the first time, my blood ran cold. Inside was an unmarked envelope containing photographs of my cabin taken from multiple angles, including shots through my windows that had to have been taken with a telephoto lens. The message was written in block letters. "We know everything about you. 24 hours to leave. Oregon faced the consequences." This wasn't just about how regulations anymore. Someone had been surveilling me, possibly for weeks before I even moved in. The question was no longer whether I was in danger, but how deep this conspiracy actually went. Before meeting Robert that night, I decided to put my cybersecurity skills to work and dig into what I was really dealing with. I pulled up the state's public records database and started running searches on Frank Morrison, the fake cop whose real name I'd spotted on that upside-down badge. Within 20 minutes, I had his employment, history, his private security license status, which had been revoked 8 months ago, and even his court records for a harassment case involving threats against mall customers. The deeper I dug, the more interesting it got. Frank Morrison was married to Jennifer Morrison, and Jennifer Morrison's maiden name was Jennifer Sharp. Veronica's niece had married the man they'd sent to intimidate me. This wasn't just some random hired muscle. This was family business. I cross-referenced the Pine Ridge HOA's Form 990 tax filings with the state's corporate database and found a web of financial relationships that would make a forensic accountant dizzy. Veronica Sharp wasn't just the HOA president. She was also listed as the registered agent for Pineridge Property Management LLC, Pineridge Security Services, and Pineridge Legal Consulting. She was basically running a one-woman empire through the HOA, funneling money between her various companies while charging the homeowners for services she provided to herself. The more I researched, the more I realized this woman had turned an entire lakeside community into her personal ATM, and anyone who threatened that cash flow became a target for elimination. As darkness fell over Pine Ridge Lake, I made my way down to the boat dock where Robert was waiting with a small tackle box and a fishing rod, the perfect cover for a clandestine meeting. Up close, I could see he was older than I'd initially thought, probably in his 70s, but his eyes were sharp and alert in a way that reminded me of retired intelligence officers I'd worked with. 28 years in Army intelligence, he said, as if reading my mind. Spent the last 8 months watching Veronica Sharp destroy 6 families in this neighborhood, and I've been documenting everything. He opened his tackle box and pulled out a small USB drive. This contains audio recordings from 3 different HOA board meetings where they planned exactly what they did to you today. They've done it before, Julian, and they'll keep doing it until someone stops them. Robert also taught me something that sent chills down my spine. He pulled out a small electronic device that looked like a radio and started sweeping it around my body and backpack. Within seconds, it started beeping near my left shoulder. Hidden in the seam of my jacket was a tracking device no bigger than a button battery, probably planted when I was distracted by the fake cops. "Standard surveillance gear," Robert explained as he carefully removed it and dropped it in the lake. "They've been watching your movements since you arrived, maybe longer." He swept the rest of my belongings and found a second device stuck under my truck's rear bumper. Veronica is not just playing legal games. She's running a full intelligence operation against you. When I got back to the cabin and plugged in Robert's USB drive, I felt like I was listening to a criminal conspiracy being planned in real time. Veronica's voice was crystal clear through my headphones. "The new owner of Lot 47 is potentially problematic. We need to establish dominance immediately before he gets comfortable." Another voice, which Robert had identified as board member Donald Hayes, responded, "Use the same approach as the Peterson family. Fake cops and legal intimidation." Veronica's laugh was cold as ice. "Exactly. But this time, we go harder. This man has connections we need to neutralize. I want his life disrupted from every possible angle. Their courtings were dated 3 weeks ago, which meant they'd been planning my harassment since before I'd even closed on the property. The most chilling part came when they discussed their ultimate goal. Project Clearwater is moving forward faster than expected. Veronica said, "We need every lakefront property under our control within 18 months, or we lose the biggest payday of our lives." Someone asked what Project Clearwater was, and Veronica's response made my blood run cold. A $50 billion federal contract that's going to transform this entire region. I have inside information about the site selection, and Pine Ridge is at the center of it. Every family we force out, every property we acquire, it's all building toward that moment when the government announces their plans and property values go through the roof. Just as I was processing the implications of what I'd heard, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my sister Emma calling from California, which was unusual since we typically texted rather than called. Her voice was shaky and scared when I answered. "Julian, something really weird just happened. A law firm I've never heard of just called me, claiming you owe them $50,000, and they're going to garnish my wages as your closest relative." My heart sank as I realized Veronica was expanding her attack beyond just me. They knew details about my job, my address, even my car payment. How could they know all that unless they'd been researching our entire family? Emma's voice cracked slightly, and I could hear the old pain creeping in. "Julian, this is just like what happened 3 years ago when that HOA in San Diego forced me to sell my house. They used the same tactics, fake debt collectors, legal threats, making my life hell until I gave up. The connection hit me like a lightning bolt. I pulled up my laptop and started searching for legal cases involving HOA harassment in San Diego from 2021. Within 10 minutes, I found it. Mesa Verde HOA versus Emma Reed. A case involving disputed maintenance fees that had forced my sister to sell her first home at a massive loss. The legal counsel listed on the court documents was Sharp Legal Services with Veronica Sharp as the consulting attorney. This wasn't just about my cabin or even Pine Ridge. Veronica had been systematically destroying my family for years, and now she was trying to finish the job by eliminating the last piece of property we owned. "Emma," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, pack a bag, and fly out here tomorrow. This fight isn't just about me anymore, it's about all of us, and we're going to end it together. The next morning, I woke up to find my worst fears confirmed. Every plant, shrub, and patch of grass around my cabin had been destroyed by what looked like industrial-strength herbicide. The beautiful lakeside landscaping that had been one of the main selling points of the property was now a brown, dead wasteland. They hadn't just vandalized my yard. They'd systematically poisoned every living thing on my land, probably hoping to force me into expensive remediation that would drain my savings and push me towards selling. But as I stood there surveying the damage, I felt something I hadn't expected. Instead of despair or defeat, I felt a cold, calculating anger settling into my bones. Veronica Sharp had just made this personal in a way she clearly didn't understand. And she was about to learn that targeting a cybersecurity expert's family was the biggest mistake of her criminal career. Megan Parker wasted no time turning my evidence into a devastating media assault. Her investigative report titled HOA Hires, Fake Cops to Terrorize Homeowners aired on Channel 7 News at 6:00 sharp, and within an hour the story was trending on social media across the entire state. She'd managed to get my dash cam footage authenticated by a digital forensics expert, blurred my face for protection, and somehow tracked down 3 other victims of Pine Ridge HOA's intimidation tactics. Watching Veronica's fake cops in television, with their upside-down badges and amateur performances exposed for the world to see, felt like the first real victory I'd had since this nightmare began. The reporter's closing line was perfect. "If your HOA is hiring fake police officers to threaten you, what other laws are they willing to break?" The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone started ringing before the broadcast even ended, with 8 different Outraged residents calling to share their own horror stories about Veronica Sharp and her board of directors. Mrs. Patterson, from Lot 32, told me about fake code enforcement officers who demanded to search her basement. The Johnsons from the North Shore described mysterious water damage that appeared overnight after they questioned HOA fee increases. Most disturbing was the call from Maria Santos, who whispered into the phone like she was afraid of being overheard. They sent fake police to my house, too. 3 months ago, they claimed I was running an illegal business and threatened to have me deported, even though I'm a naturalized citizen. I was so scared I stopped attending HOA meetings altogether. But Veronica wasn't going to take this media assault lying down. Within hours of Megan's report airing, I watched her flex the kind of soft power that really scared me. She called the editor of the Outraged Gazette directly, and I could practically hear the conversation through the walls. "Jim, this is Veronica Sharp. I think we need to discuss responsible journalism and the importance of getting both sides of a story before destroying someone's reputation." By the next morning, the local paper ran a front-page story titled "HOA President Fights Back Against Malicious Claims," portraying Veronica as a dedicated public servant being attacked by a vindictive newcomer with political connections. She'd managed to completely flip the narrative in less than 12 hours, turning herself into the victim and me into the villain. Emma arrived from California looking like she'd aged 5 years in the past week, carrying a suitcase and a laptop bag filled with her own documentation about the San Diego HOA case. She'd spent the entire flight researching Veronica's legal history, and what she'd found was both impressive and terrifying. Julian, this woman, isn't just running a small-town scam. She's been consulting for HOAs across 4 different states, and every single community she touches ends up in some kind of legal crisis that forces residents to sell. Emma pulled out a thick folder of printouts. I found 17 different cases where she was involved, and the pattern is always the same: fake violations, legal intimidation, mysterious property damage, and ultimately forced sales to shell companies that she controls through various business entities. The scope of Veronica's operation was staggering. Emma had traced shell company ownership through 3 different states and found that Veronica controlled at least 12 different LLCs, all designed to hide her involvement in property acquisitions. She wasn't just the president of one HOA. She was running a multi-state real estate empire built on fear, intimidation, and legal manipulation. The California case where I lost my house, that was just a beta test for what she's doing here in Pine Ridge, Emma explained, her voice getting stronger as she talked through the evidence. She's been refining her techniques for years, and now she's ready to scale up to something much bigger with this Project Clearwater situation. That's when Veronica decided to escalate to full legal warfare. A process server appeared at my door at 7 hours in the morning, serving me with a lawsuit that was clearly designed to financially devastate me before I could fight back effectively. The complaint alleged defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, interference with business relations, and about 6 other causes of action that her team of lawyers had obviously spent days crafting. The damages she was seeking were specifically calculated to destroy me. $2 million plus attorney's fees, plus an injunction preventing me from further harassment of the HOA. Even if I won the case eventually, the legal costs would probably force me to sell the cabin just to pay my own attorneys. Emma read through the lawsuit with the practiced eye of someone who'd been through this before, and her analysis was brutally accurate. She's not trying to win this case, Julian. She's trying to bleed you dry with legal fees while simultaneously painting you as a wealthy troublemaker who's abusing the court system. Look at how it's written. Every paragraph is designed to be quoted in news articles. Emma was right. The lawsuit read more like a press release than a legal document filled with inflammatory language about my politically connected harassment campaign and my abuse of government resources. Veronica was playing chess while most people were playing checkers, using the legal system as both a weapon and a public relations tool. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Megan called with the results of her deeper investigation into Veronica's background. "Julian, I've been digging into her political campaign for mayor, and the financial disclosures are fascinating. She's been receiving donations from construction companies, land development firms, and even some federal contractors that don't typically get involved in local politics." Megan's voice had that excited tone that investigative reporters get when they smell a really big story. "More importantly, I found the connection to your sister's case in San Diego. Veronica wasn't just consulting for that HOA. She was being paid by a development company that ended up buying all the foreclosed properties in Emma's neighborhood at below-market prices. The pattern was becoming crystal clear, and it was much bigger than just Pine Ridge. Veronica had built a sophisticated operation that identified valuable properties, used HOAs to terrorize the current owners into selling cheaply, then flipped those properties to developers or held them for massive government contracts like Project Clearwater. She'd been doing this for years across multiple states, perfecting her techniques and building a network of corrupt officials, fake contractors, and intimidation specialists. Emma and I weren't just fighting for our cabin or seeking justice for past wrongs. We were up against a criminal organization that had been systematically destroying families and communities for profit, and we'd stumbled into the middle of their biggest operation yet. As I sat on my deck that evening, looking out at the poisoned wasteland that used to be my beautiful lakefront yard, Emma came outside with 2 cups of coffee and the grim determination I remembered from our childhood. "So, what's the plan, big brother? Because I'm not running away this time, and I'm not letting her destroy another family." I took a sip of coffee and smiled for the first time in days. "Emma, we're going to do what I do best. We're going to hack their entire operation. But we're going to do it completely legally, using every resource we have and every mistake they've made." But as I said those words, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Your sister shouldn't have come to Pine Ridge. Some accidents can't be prevented, no matter who your friends are." The escalation I'd been expecting came faster than I anticipated. Governor Ellison called me personally at 6 o'clock in the morning, his voice carrying the weight of serious government business. "Julian, based on your evidence and Megan's investigation, I'm transferring this entire matter to the State Attorney General's office. We're not just dealing with HOA harassment anymore. This looks like organized criminal activity with potential federal implications." Within hours, the AG's office had filed a petition for a temporary restraining order in state court requesting that all Pine Ridge HOA board activities be frozen for 48 hours, pending a comprehensive investigation. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like the full weight of legitimate government power was finally on my side. Veronica's response to the TTRO was swift and vicious. She held a press conference on the steps of the Pine Ridge Community Center, surrounded by her legal team and several residents she'd obviously coached beforehand. "Julian Reed is a wealthy, politically connected individual who's using his government friends to harass a volunteer organization dedicated to protecting property values," she declared, looking directly into the television cameras. "This is exactly the kind of corruption and abuse of power that I'll fight against as your next mayor." She'd somehow obtained copies of my consulting contracts with various government agencies and was using them to paint me as a shadowy political operative rather than a cybersecurity expert who just wanted to live peacefully by a lake. Emma's investigative skills proved invaluable in uncovering the true scope of what we were fighting. While I focused on the technical aspects of documenting evidence, she dove deep into financial records and corporate filings, following money trails across state lines with the persistence of a bloodhound. "Julian, Project Clearwater isn't just some government contract," she said, spreading printouts across my kitchen table. "I found leaked emails and meeting schedules that suggest it's a classified federal infrastructure project worth potentially hundreds of billions of dollars." She'd managed to trace connections between Veronica's shell companies and 3 different federal contractors, all through publicly available information and leaked documents that had appeared on various transparency websites. The most disturbing discovery came when Emma cross-referenced the timeline of Veronica's property acquisitions with the dates of various federal agency meetings. She's been getting inside information for at least 2 years, probably longer. Every property she's forced, people to sell, every family she's destroyed. It's all been building toward this moment when the government announces Project Clearwater and property values explode. The scope was breathtaking and terrifying. If Veronica succeeded in controlling all the lakefront property around Pine Ridge, she wouldn't just be wealthy. She'd have enough money and political influence to corrupt entire local governments and expand her operations statewide. Robert's military intelligence background proved crucial in identifying the source of Veronica's inside information. He'd been quietly monitoring federal contracting databases and referencing them with visitor logs from various government buildings that were available through Freedom of Information Act requests. There's a pattern here that any intelligence analyst would recognize, he explained, showing us a timeline he'd constructed. Every major decision about Project Clearwater corresponds with meetings between Veronica and Jerry Mason, a mid-level official in the Department of Homeland Security. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Hotel receipts, restaurant charges, even parking tickets that placed them in the same locations at the same times when classified information would have been discussed. We'd established a clear chain of custody for every piece of evidence with formal documentation provided to both the state AG's office and a contact Emma had developed at the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. The encrypted emails, the meeting records, the financial transactions, everything was being preserved according to federal evidence standards in case this eventually became a criminal prosecution. We're not just fighting a corrupt HOA president. I realized as we organized our findings, we're documenting a conspiracy that involves federal employees selling classified information for personal profit. This is espionage-level criminal activity. Just as we were beginning to feel confident about our evidence, the personal attacks escalated to a level that made my blood run cold. My phone rang at 11:30 at night, and the voice on the other end was electronically distorted but clearly threatening. Stop digging into things that don't concern you or your sister will have an accident. We know exactly where Emma is, what she's driving, where she shops, everything about her daily routine. The line went dead before I could respond, leaving me staring at my phone in disbelief. These people weren't just trying to steal property anymore. They were threatening my family with physical violence to protect their criminal enterprise. Emma took the threat with a calmness that both impressed and worried me. Julian, this means we're close to something they're really afraid of. They wouldn't risk making direct threats unless they were desperate. She was right, but the fear in my gut was very real. I'd gotten my sister involved in a situation that had escalated far beyond property disputes into something that could genuinely endanger her life. When I walked outside to check the perimeter security cameras I'd installed, my heart nearly stopped. Every single camera had been destroyed during the night, smashed with what looked like sledgehammers, and there were tire tracks from multiple vehicles circling the cabin like predators stalking prey. The message was unmistakable. They could get to us any time they wanted, and the only thing protecting us was their decision to use intimidation rather than direct violence. As I stood in my driveway, looking at the destroyed security equipment, I realized this had become something much bigger than a fight over a lake house. Emma and I had uncovered a criminal conspiracy that reached into the federal government itself, and the people behind it were willing to use any means necessary to protect their operation. The question was no longer whether we could win this fight, but whether we'd survive long enough to expose the truth before they decided to stop playing games and eliminate us permanently. The internal battle was consuming me as I sat alone in my kitchen at 4 in the morning, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The rational voice in my head kept whispering the same arguments. Walk away, sell the cabin, take Emma somewhere safe, and let someone else deal with Veronica's criminal empire. We were ordinary people going up against a sophisticated organization with federal connections, unlimited legal resources, and a proven willingness to destroy lives. Every logical calculation suggested we were outmatched and outgunned. But then, I thought about Maria Santos whispering into her phone because she was afraid of being overheard in her own home. I thought about the Johnsons dealing with mysterious water damage after questioning the fee increases. I thought about my sister forced to sell her first home because she couldn't afford to fight back against this same woman 3 years ago. If Emma, and I walked away. Now, how many more families would Veronica destroy before someone finally stopped her? Emma found me there as the sun was rising. And without saying a word, she poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down across from me. "You're thinking about giving up," she said. Not as a question, but as a statement of fact. "Julian, I've been running from this woman for 3 years, changing jobs, moving apartments, always looking over my shoulder, wondering if she'd found some new way to hurt me. I came here because I'm tired of being afraid, and I'm not leaving until we finish this." Her voice carried a determination I remembered from childhood, the same tone she'd used when she decided to become a journalist, despite our parents' concerns about job security. Besides, if we don't stop her here, she'll just find new communities to terrorize, new families to destroy. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about breaking a criminal organization that's been operating with impunity for years. The FBI's response to the threats against Emma was both reassuring and ominous. Agent Sarah Martinez called from the Sacramento field office to explain the protective measures they were implementing. "Mr. Reed, we're taking the threats against your sister very seriously. We've arranged for discreet surveillance of her movements and we're coordinating with local law enforcement to ensure her safety." But then came the part that made my stomach drop. "However, we strongly recommend that Emma return to California immediately. Pine Ridge has become an active crime scene, and we can't guarantee her safety if she remains in the operational area." Emma absolutely refused to consider leaving. "Agent Martinez, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not abandoning my brother when we're this close to exposing everything. If you can protect me in California, you can protect me here." Robert's plan was more elaborate than anything I could have imagined from a retired intelligence officer living quietly by a lake. His basement had been transformed into what looked like a command center, complete with surveillance monitors, communication equipment, and detailed maps of Pine Ridge marked with colored pins and notations. "Julian, we're going to give Veronica exactly what she thinks she wants," he explained, pointing to a timeline he'd constructed on a whiteboard. "She believes she's dealing with an amateur who got lucky with political connections. She has no idea. She's walked into a counterintelligence operation designed by someone who spent 30 years doing this for the United States Army. The plan was elegant in its psychological sophistication. We'd stage an emergency community meeting, where panicked residents would appear to turn against me, giving Veronica the perfect opportunity to gloat and reveal information she thought was safe to share. The logistics of the operation were incredibly detailed. Robert had been monitoring Veronica's communications for weeks, not through illegal surveillance, but by analyzing patterns in publicly available information like social media posts, local, newspaper quotes, and court filings. "She's predictable in her arrogance," he explained. "Every time she thinks she's winning, she can't resist demonstrating her superior knowledge and connections. We're going to create a situation where she feels completely in control, surrounded by people she thinks are afraid of her. And we're going to let her hang herself with her own words." The community center meeting was scheduled for 7 in the evening with media coverage and official observers that would make any admissions legally binding and publicly documented. What most of the attendees didn't realize was that several of the concerned residents calling for the meeting were actually federal agents who had quietly moved into rental properties around Pine Ridge over the past month. The FBI had been building a case against Veronica's organization for longer than I'd realized, and our evidence had provided the final pieces they needed to move forward with arrests. Megan Parker arrived with a full television crew, ostensibly, to cover community reaction to the ongoing legal controversy, but really to ensure that everything was recorded for both legal and historical purposes. The presence of a representative from the Attorney General's office added official weight to the proceedings and guaranteed that any threats or confessions would be documented by the state government. Veronica made her entrance like a politician, at a campaign rally, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy blue suit and accompanied by her usual entourage of lawyers and supporters. She clearly expected to dominate the meeting and turn it into a public relations victory that would demonstrate her control over the community while discrediting me as a troublemaker with too many government connections. What she didn't know was that Robert had spent 3 days installing professional-grade recording equipment throughout the community center, or that FBI technicians had set up additional surveillance in adjacent buildings. Every word spoken in that room would be captured with courtroom-quality audio and video evidence. The trap began to close when Robert stood up during the public comment period and asked what seemed like an innocent question about future development plans. "Miss Sharp, there have been rumors circulating about potential federal government projects in this area that could significantly affect property values. As our HOA president and a candidate for mayor, do you have any special knowledge about government activities that might impact Pineridge residents?" I watched Veronica's face carefully as she processed the question, seeing the exact moment when her ego overcame her caution. She could have deflected the question, claimed ignorance, or simply refused to answer because such matters were outside the HOA's jurisdiction. Instead, her need to demonstrate superior knowledge and insider connections led her directly into our trap. "I can assure this community that I am very well informed about all federal activities that could affect Pineridge," Veronica announced with the confidence of someone who believed herself untouchable. "Through my professional relationships and legal expertise, I've been working behind the scenes to ensure that our neighborhood benefits from upcoming development opportunities that others don't even know about yet." The room was completely silent as she continued digging her own grave. "Project Clearwater represents a tremendous opportunity for property value appreciation, and those of us who've been preparing for these changes will be positioned to benefit significantly when the announcements are made public." Emma stood up with a folder full of documents and delivered the follow-up question that would destroy Veronica's life forever. "Mrs. Sharp, could you please explain to this community your relationship with Jerry Mason from the Department of Homeland Security and how your advanced knowledge of classified federal projects relates to your systematic campaign to force longtime residents to sell their properties at below-market prices?" The color drained from Veronica's face as she realized she'd walked directly into a carefully constructed ambush. But instead of remaining silent or consulting with her attorneys, panic took control of her decision-making process. What happened next was so shocking that even the FBI agent seemed stunned by her reaction. Veronica pulled out her phone and called Jerry Mason right there in front of the entire community, the media, and government representatives. "Jerry, we have an emergency here. These people have somehow obtained information about our arrangement, and they're trying to destroy everything we've built. You need to use whatever federal resources are available to shut this down immediately." Her voice carried clearly through the silent room as every recording device captured her confession to conspiracy, bribery, and abuse of federal authority. She just admitted to crimes that carried potential sentences of decades in federal prison. The FBI agents moved with practiced efficiency as soon as Veronica ended her call. "Veronica Sharp, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit bribery of a federal official, conspiracy to commit fraud, witness intimidation, and violation of federal classified information security statutes." The lead agent's voice calm and professional as he read her rights, but I could see the satisfaction in his eyes at finally bringing down someone they'd obviously been investigating for a long time. "Jerry Mason is being arrested simultaneously in Washington, D.C. on related charges of accepting bribes and unauthorized disclosure of classified information." As the handcuffs closed around Veronica's wrists and the reality of her situation began to sink in, I felt a mixture of relief and disbelief that we'd actually succeeded in bringing down such a sophisticated criminal operation. But even in defeat, Veronica managed to deliver one final threat that reminded us how dangerous these people really were. As she was being escorted toward the exit, she turned back toward Emma and me with eyes full of pure malice. "You think arresting me ends this? My organization has connections you haven't even discovered yet. Others won't make the mistakes I made, and they won't be as patient with obstacles as I was." Her words sent a chill through the room and served as a stark reminder that we might have won this particular battle. But the war against corruption in Pine Ridge was far from over. 6 months later, I stood in the federal courthouse in downtown Sacramento, watching Veronica Sharp receive her sentence. The judge's words carried the weight of justice that had been too long delayed. "Mrs. Sharp, you are hereby sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for conspiracy to commit bribery, fraud, witness intimidation, and abuse of classified information." Jerry Mason, sentenced the same day in Washington, D.C., received 15 years for his role in the conspiracy. Frank Morrison, caught in the fake police scheme, got 7 years in a plea deal that required him to testify against his aunt-in-law's entire operation. The courtroom was packed with Veronica's victims, families who'd lost their homes, and community members who'd lived in fear of her retribution. When the gavel came down on her sentence, I felt a collective exhale of relief from everyone she'd terrorized over the years. The transformation of Pine Ridge had been remarkable to witness. The old HOA board was dissolved entirely, and the community voted to establish a new resident council with transparent governance rules that required all meetings to be public, all finances to be audited quarterly, and all major decisions to be approved by direct community vote. Emma and I were both elected to the interim leadership committee, not because we sought power, but because our neighbors trusted us to build something better from the ashes of Veronica's corrupt empire. The changes weren't just administrative. They were cultural. People who'd been afraid to speak up for years were suddenly attending meetings, volunteering for committees, and taking active roles in shaping their community's future. The financial settlement from Veronica's seized assets provided some measure of justice for her victims. 17 families, including Emma and me, received a total of $12.8 million from the liquidation of her various shell companies and fraudulently acquired properties. I used my portion to establish the Outraged Justice Fund, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing legal assistance to homeowners facing HOA harassment and corruption across the country. Emma took a remote position with a national investigative journalism organization and moved into the cabin's guest room permanently, turning her settlement money into seed funding for a documentary about HOA abuse that would eventually air on 3 major networks. The personal healing was perhaps even more important than the legal victories. Emma and I had reconnected in ways we'd never managed as adults, spending evenings on the deck talking about everything from childhood memories to our plans for the future. She'd found her calling in investigative journalism, and watching her transform her own trauma into a tool for helping others was incredibly inspiring. Julian, I spent 3 years feeling like a victim, but now I understand that surviving Veronica's attacks gave me exactly the knowledge and motivation I needed to help other families fight back. The cabin had become what I'd originally hoped it would be, a peaceful sanctuary. But now it was also the headquarters for a growing movement against HOA corruption. Our friendship with Robert deepened into something like a chosen family relationship. The retired intelligence officer had found new purpose in his role as an unofficial community security consultant, teaching neighbors how to protect themselves from surveillance and helping other towns deal with similar corruption problems. We spent many evenings at the boat dock fishing and sharing stories about our respective careers in government service. "You know, Julian, I thought retirement would be boring," he said during one of our sunset conversations. "Turns out fighting domestic criminals is just as satisfying as hunting foreign spies, maybe more so because you get to see the families you've helped sleeping peacefully in their own homes." Governor Ellison offered me a permanent position as the state's first director of community anti-corruption initiatives, a role that would allow me to work remotely from Pine Ridge while coordinating investigations into HOA abuse, municipal corruption, and other forms of local government misconduct. The position came with significant resources and the authority to work directly with federal agencies when cases crossed state lines. Julian, what you and Emma accomplished here proved that ordinary citizens can take down sophisticated criminal enterprises if they have the right support and resources. The governor explained during our phone conversation. I want to make sure every community in this state has access to those same tools and support systems. The environmental restoration of Pine Ridge became a symbol of the community's rebirth. The federal government decided to designate the entire area as a national wildlife preserve rather than pursuing the original classified development project, partly due to environmental impact studies, but also because our investigation had revealed how the site selection process had been corrupted by Veronica's influence. Property values increased significantly, but in a way that benefited the entire community rather than enriching a single criminal operation. The poisoned landscape around my cabin had been professionally remediated and replanted with native species, creating a beautiful demonstration of how communities can heal from environmental damage when they work together. The impact of our story spread far beyond Pine Ridge. Megan Parker's investigative series won a Peabody Award for Excellence in Journalism, and Emma's documentary sparked legislative hearings in 12 states about the need for HOA reform and oversight. More importantly, we started receiving calls from communities across the country where residents were facing similar intimidation campaigns. The Pine Ridge Justice Fund had handled over 40 cases in its first 6 months of operation, providing legal assistance and investigative support to families who couldn't afford to fight back on their own. As I sat on my deck one evening watching Emma work on her laptop while Robert prepared his fishing gear for the next morning, I reflected on how dramatically our lives had changed since that first encounter with fake police officers. The cabin had become everything I'd hoped for and more, not just a retreat from the world, but a base of operations for making the world a little bit better. My phone buzzed with a text from a resident in Oregon. Julian, we've got an HOA situation here that looks exactly like what you faced in Pine Ridge. Can you help us? I smiled and showed the message to Emma, who looked up from her computer with a determined expression I'd come to know so well. Looks like we've got another story to tell, big brother. When do we start? Standing here on my deck at Pine Ridge, watching the sunset paint the lake gold, I'm reminded that every one of us has more power than we realize. If my story taught me anything, it's that ordinary people can take down the most corrupt systems when we refuse to back down and support each other. Your story matters too, and I'd love to hear it. If this resonated with you, consider joining our Happer Stories community where we celebrate everyday heroes who fight back. Like and subscribe to keep these stories alive because together we're unstoppable.